Joining us here is a friend and a friend of the program and a Hall of Famer, literally and figuratively in his own right, Bob Costas. How are you, Bob?
I'm okay, Rich, but more sad news. 10 Hall of Famers in the last 9 months, beginning with Al Kaline in April. And, of course, when you talk about Hank Aaron, it's insufficient to say that he's a baseball Hall of Famer. It's even insufficient to say he's one of the all-time true inner circle greatest baseball players. All of that is true. But Hank Aaron transcended that. Hank Aaron is an American hero. And as you mentioned a moment ago, a legitimate civil rights hero. It's often a cliche when people say, well, he was great at this or that, but he was also a great person. That happens to be true, though. Cliches become cliches because at least occasionally they're true. Hank Aaron was a great, great baseball player. He was also a very decent man. And I think a lot of what he was able to accomplish beyond baseball flowed from the fact that he was such an essentially good and decent man.
So let's. How do you want to handle this, Bob? Because the story of how he broke into the bigs, and then what he became, and then what he was after playing, and then the night of April 8th, 1974. I guess let's get to that. I guess as the through line was that night. What were your recollections of it, and what conversations might have you had with Hank Aaron about that night where he broke the record?
Well, you think about that night, and before I get into the contrast, I want to say that I just read a very gracious statement that Barry Bonds put out upon learning of Hank Aaron's death. So we have to give Barry credit for that. But now, when you think about April 8th, 1974, some of your audience isn't old enough to have witnessed it firsthand. I did. I was a senior at Syracuse University. Watched it on NBC that night with Curt Gowdy and Joe Garagiola. Of course, Milo Hamilton's radio call for the Braves and Scully, typically great on Dodger radio, are also frequently heard. But I remember Curt Gowdy and Joe Garagiola that night. I was working already at WSYR TV and radio in Syracuse while still going to classes at the university. So I was in the newsroom at WSYR TV. And I remember that even then, and you couldn't take this for granted in 1974, there were two black staffers there. One was a cameraman and one was a reporter, along with a couple of members of the sports staff and the news staff. And everybody stopped, no matter what they were doing. Aaron had one at-bat earlier in the game, I think, and he walked. But each time he came up to bat, everything stopped, and everyone focused on the game. You have to remember that then baseball was the true national pastime. You look at World Series and All-Star Game ratings then as opposed to now. And it was on NBC, not on ESPN. No disrespect intended. Mm-hmm. It just had a different national impact. Everyone was talking about it. You didn't have to know a sacrifice bunt from a sacrifice fly to know that this really mattered. And to give you an idea of what a different time it was, here's the 9 or 10 of us decide collectively, let's send Henry Aaron a telegram to congratulate him. So we sent a telegram. I don't even know if Western Union and telegrams exist anymore. We sent a telegram to the Braves offices in Atlanta. You just think about this, right? Henry Aaron probably being congratulated by everyone in baseball, by presidents and dignitaries. Hey, is there a telegram in there from Bobby Costas and then the guys at WS? Yeah, pull that out. I'd like to frame that one. But anyway,
I love it.
You contrast that with the night that Bonds statistically only surpassed Henry Aaron. Barry Bonds has 7 more home runs than Henry Aaron. That is a statistical fact. What Henry Aaron did on April 8, 1974 has a deeper meaning and a deeper resonance. And so you contrast the ambivalence that people felt about what happened in 2007 in San Francisco against the deep and abiding respect and appreciation that the images of April 8th, 1974 in Atlanta call forth. You know, things are objectively factual, statistically factual, and then there's a matter of what it means to people emotionally, what it means historically, what it means in legend. Henry Aaron had all that 1,000 times over that night and throughout his career.
Did you ever have a conversation with him about the hate mail that he kept in his attic? Well,
yes.
Okay. What was that about?
I did. We talked about it. It was an honor to be able to say not only that I covered and interviewed Hank Aaron, but that we were friends. And he asked me to MC a few events, charitable events that he was part of, a birthday celebration that President Clinton attended and the Temptations performed at, I guess sometime in the late 90s because Clinton was still president. So I knew Henry pretty well. And we had this conversation both privately and once on the air. And my point to him was, I just hope you know that even in the face of this stark, unvarnished racism that you faced, and I understand why you would keep those letters, because he had explained it many times. He didn't want to forget what it was that he faced. And one reality, not the only reality, but one reality of what America was at that time. And I might say parenthetically here, Rich, we thought that had been confined to the deepest, darkest corners. I'd like to think it isn't something that we're going to be living with forever. But we've seen in recent years that dark element of American life has not been extinguished. It exists, and it's larger than we wanted to believe it was. But it was right in Henry Aaron's face as he approached Babe Ruth's record. But the point I wanted to make to him was, I hope you knew then and now that millions and millions of white Americans were also rooting for you. Not just black America. A sizable portion of white America got it. Surpassing Babe Ruth's home run total doesn't mean that Babe Ruth wasn't an all-time great player and that he doesn't matter anymore in baseball history. He'll always matter. Here's the proof. He still does. Babe Ruth's name still resonates. But that millions of white Americans, even then, not in retrospect, but even then, had some understanding. They couldn't have a full understanding because they didn't experience it directly, but some understanding of what it was you faced, not just as a player, but as a person. And great respect and admiration for you triumphing not only on the field, but over all the societal pressures that you faced. And his face softened in a small smile, and he said, yes, I understand that. I've always understood it, and I understand it now, but that doesn't change the other reality. And, of course, he's right. You know, these aren't realities that you have to pick a side. They're both true. One is a glorious and triumphant reality, Henry Aaron's story, and the other is an ugly reality, what he had to face in addition to rival pitchers. And even today, we see that in one way or another, that awful element of American life has not been fully extinguished. We still have to confront it.
Bob Costas here on the Rich Eisen Show. And when Bonds broke the record, he was there. You know, he was there. He took part in it. He did not, I guess, shy away from the moment. What was his take on all of that with Bonds, now that we see his statement today? Bob?
Rich, it's a measure of just how classy and gracious he was that when the Giants asked him to do it in anticipation of Bonds hitting 756, he agreed to do it. They stopped the game. There's a celebration in San Francisco, and then all of a sudden on the Jumbotron, there appears Henry Aaron with a very gracious message of congratulations to Barry Bonds. And if Hank was annoyed or felt some affront that his record was not only broken, but broken under the circumstances that it was, which we all understand, he was too gracious and too big a man to ever say that, to ever grouse about that publicly. And I think in many ways, not just with regard to the record, but with regard to his whole life, his career and his whole life, for a very, very long time, Hank was very comfortable with what he had achieved, the life that he led, and the way the vast, vast majority of the American public viewed him. So he didn't have to offer any explanation or any, well, yeah, but I did this and I did that. You never heard anything like that from him. What he did, both as a player and as a person, spoke for itself. And I think he had great peace of mind about that. Every year at Cooperstown, when the Hall of Famers come back, and it's such a striking scene when you see all these bold-faced names on that stage in Cooperstown, and they're all warmly greeted, and the applause is greater for the Sandy Koufaxes and the Willie Mayeses and some others, and understandably, there's levels of greatness. But when Henry was introduced in recent years, the appreciation had a different tone to it. There was just an abiding respect and appreciation. You could feel it in the way the crowd responded to him. And then afterward, at the gatherings in the Hall of Fame, in the gallery where the Hall of Fame plaques are, Henry would sit, especially in the later years of his life. He had trouble standing. And he would sit. And he was such a humble man. None of this came from him. There was no bravado about him. But not only would fans and various baseball people, but Hall of Fame players themselves, greatest of the great, would come to him as if they were coming to a dignitary of some kind. And he would sit there and almost receive them. And none of that came from any sense of ego on his part, but that's just the way people felt about him. To see a Ken Griffey Jr. go toward him with the deepest respect. I'm talking to Mr. Aaron now. No one else. I'm talking to Mr. Aaron now. That's the place he held, and it was a place he had earned.
A few more minutes left with Bob Costas here on the Rich Eisen Show. What do you think the conversation between Hank Aaron and Joe Morgan is going to be like tonight? Bob, what do you think about that one?
Well, they knew each other well. I had great regard for both of them. Happy to know that, or to be able to say that I was friends with both of them. If it happens that way, the way some people think it does, and it would be nice to think that it does, then it isn't just a conversation with Joe Morgan or Jackie Robinson. It's a conversation with Babe Ruth. It's a conversation with every great player who ever played. If that's the way it plays out.
Yeah, it's amazing. Lasorda will be there too, right? I mean, it's just you're right. It's been a really tough year, Bob. It's been a rough year for some living Hall of Famers who have left us.
Well, one more thought here.
Sure.
I think very often we think of people defined by the big public stage circumstances of their lives. But how they respond to those circumstances is an outgrowth of who they were to begin with. I think of a conversation I once had with Arthur Ashe, and I made what I thought was a good point, and he thought it was too. I said, the way you carried yourself, Arthur, off with such grace and class and dignity, in part, was that the same thing as with Jackie Robinson, who was a more combative person by nature than Arthur Ashe was? But you'll recall that Branch Rickey had the famous conversation with Robinson and said, at least for the first few years, you can't fight back. You have to carry yourself with great reserve if this experiment is going to work. And Robinson knew, as unfair as it was, that since all eyes were on him, any misstep would be misinterpreted and used against him and against the cause. So, Arthur, did you understand that? When you were the only black face at Wimbledon, on the court or in the stands, the only black face there, was that part of why you felt an obligation to carry yourself the way you did? And he said, what you're saying is true, and I understood that it was true of Jackie Robinson. But the main reason I was the way I was and am the way I am was that when I was a kid, if I wasn't, my father would have kicked my ass. So whether it's Arthur Ashe or it's Hank Aaron, whomever you want to name, who you are in the big circumstances is a product of who you were in the small circumstances.
Bob, you're the best. Now that you have placed that in perspective, now I'm thinking, what's the conversation with Muhammad Ali going to be like, right? And
Well, sure.
and Ashe joining Jackie, welcoming Hank Aaron in. It's just I'm getting emotional just thinking about it, Bob. I really am.
And Rich, when people say, and I hope this has been discredited, except in other weird bubbles, to stick to sports. It hasn't always been African American players and athletes, but predominantly it has been. Why? Because for the longest time, sports and some aspects of entertainment were the places where Black Americans were able to break through first and command people's attention. And since sports is basically a meritocracy, it's hard to deny the greatness of someone who establishes themselves like Muhammad Ali did, or Arthur Ashe, or Hank Aaron, or whomever. But this idea of stick to sports, sports sometimes, I'm not saying that every pronouncement by every black athlete is automatically correct or automatically to be agreed with. I don't believe that everyone with a Twitter account is automatically Frederick Douglass in Nikes, but there is a long and proud history of black athletes making a difference and not only representing other black Americans, but forcing white Americans to focus on the legitimacy of the points they were making, either making directly or symbolically. And Hank Aaron is very, very near the top of that list. He is an important American, not just an important baseball player.
Bob, thank you so much. I knew you were the first person I thought of. So thank you so much for taking the time here on a Friday at the last second. And let's chat down the road. You be well.
Thank you, Rich. Take care.
The one and only Bob Costas.